Boom, and there I have clicked the button. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Vagabond Dog Industry Chats. This week we have an old friend of mine, Dan Amrich. Welcome to the show. Hello.
Hi, very old.
For those of you who are unfamiliar with this man, Dan Amrich is also known as Dan Electro from the old Game Pro magazine. He's author of a book called Critical Path: How to Review Video Games for a Living. You were a historic podcaster on one of the first shows I ever really listened to, the OXM podcast. Previously, community manager for Activision. You were a guitar enthusiast, cover band, parody band, and garage band superstar.
Oh my.
Highlight of a Campbell's soup commercial.
Oh, we're gonna go there, are we? Okay.
Ghostbusters superfan and an
Yes.
NBA Hang Time secret character.
Wow,
Hello.
you've got basically everything
But
that
there's
I
more.
like to.
I had to cut things from the list.
I am very grateful to have lived a very weird life so far.
It's great.
But yeah,
It's
I've had some
fantastic.
incredible opportunities and some great anecdotes to set people to sleep with every night. Like if you want to be bored, I'll just talk about myself. It's great.
I'm curious then, with all of that, how do you classify yourself other than the whatever job you have at the current moment? I mean, like I say I am an indie game developer, but did you call a Dan Amrich?
I'm an editor. Like I'm a writer editor. Like at my core, I'm a writer, but in
Hmm.
order to be employed, I'm an editor,
I
right? Like
see.
that's the way it works. Like writers live hand to mouth. Editors get staff jobs. So that's what was great about working at GamePro for 7 years was like I would work with freelance writers, but at that point I already knew how to edit my own copy, how to improve other people's copy, how to hit deadlines, all the writer things. The old phrase is all editors can write, but not all writers can edit. It is a different skill set, but you have to deeply understand writing in order to be an effective editor. So yeah, I self-define as a writer slash editor, which frankly I think the modern job market sees as so you can do marketing. Like
Hmm.
it's very weird to me because I'm always like, yeah, I'm a storyteller. Marketers love to hear I'm a storyteller. I'm like, well, yeah, I guess. I mean, I'm really just sort of an avatar for my audience, right? Like I'm here to get information for them, and if they could be where I was, whether I'm visiting a developer or reviewing a game that isn't out yet, what would they want to know? And that's kind of what's always driven me as a writer is like, what can I teach other people? What can I experience? And then say, here's some information you figure out how to use it. I'm not going to tell
Hmm.
you what to think, but I'm going to tell you what I thought, and hopefully you can take it from there. Whereas, like, when you look out there now, like anybody with editorial skills like mine now generally works in marketing. And I like that just makes me sad because I'm like, I don't want to sell people things.
Right.
I want to. I want to inspire people about things, or I want to tell them what they might want to buy, but not from that perspective.
Right.
It's weird. So yeah, I'm a writer editor. I like words.
It's interesting in both or all of those roles. It is an intermediary sort of position where you have the information coming in from one side, whether that be the content of the game itself being translated into a review, or if you are in a marketing role, concepts and communication from the development team who doesn't really have the words or capacity to communicate to the public, hey, what is our game?
Hmm.
So how do you, I guess then Mike, the valuable question here is like, how do you be a good conduit? And also you're getting a comment, killer guitar, from my buddy Riggy.
Thank you. We'll talk about that later, maybe.
Yes.
Um, well, it's funny. That is the key skill that I saw. Because working in community development, when I went to Activision in 2010, um, right before the Infinity Ward breakup, by the way. So that was dicey,
Hmm.
and I made a lot of mistakes along the way on what I'm allowed to say and what I'm not allowed to say. What I would have said as a journalist, quotes, game journalist, what I would have said then, and then transitioning to like the liability of a stock price that can drop based on what the numbskull says on their social media, that was bad. But the core skill, I do believe, is you have an awareness of what it is to speak to a larger audience and not to speak for yourself. Like, at GamePro, at the time we got all kinds of, crap for writing as cartoon characters. The reason GamePro had cartoon characters was because when the magazine started, long before I was there, in 1989, it was like 3 or 4 people, and they wanted to make it look like it was 20 people. So they made up a whole bunch of fake names, and they thought, like, well, this is aimed at 13-year-olds and 12-year-olds. That's fun. Let's just be cartoon characters because we can be. And then it became like part of the brand, right? So then you couldn't get away from it.
Mm-hmm.
And then as sort of the game industry started to become more serious,
Right.
then it's like, well, now you don't have any credibility because you're not writing under your own name. I'm like, there's only one Dan on the masthead. Like, I did that on purpose. So the nice thing was, yeah, I know that I am not, even though I'm giving my subjective opinion about a game when I review it, I am speaking on behalf of the magazine, and then I am speaking with an awareness of what the audience is looking for. And really, the GamePro formula was, is this worth your money or not? I always assumed that the GamePro audience was a 13 or 14-year-old kid. They might have an after-school job. They might now just be starting to like earn an allowance or maybe earn some of their own funding. But 14 is kind of young to be like working after school in like a retail job, right? Like you don't see a lot of 14-year-olds even at McDonald's or fast food or whatever. I worked in record stores. So, but that was when I was in high school, 16, 17, a little bit older, and through college. So the GamePro review winds up being, you've probably got 3 new games that you get a year. One of them is your birthday gift, one of them is your holiday gift, and one of them is the one that you save up the rest of the year to buy. Suddenly it becomes extremely important. How many levels are there? How long does it take to beat the game? Like the stuff that we now laugh at because that's not art criticism. Mm-hmm. How long does it take to consider the Mona Lisa? But if you're a 14-year-old kid, you're like, is it Battletoads or is it Metroid? That's really important. So being aware that whatever I said about a game wasn't just my subjective opinion. It spoke on behalf of a larger whole. Like GamePro gave this a 4.5 out of 5. GamePro gave this a guy whose hair is on fire and his eyes are bugging out and he's screaming because the fun factor is 5. So that became the key skill that companies want. Like they suddenly realized in the age of influencers, as that was dawning, they're like, we don't need the press, but we need somebody who can speak like the press currently speaks and has the trust of the press. And that's how I got the Activision gig, because they're like, we want our own Major Nelson. That was actually the pitch.
Right.
And I was like, cool. The problem was the person that pitched me that, the rest of the company didn't understand who Major Nelson was or what kind of access I should have. So it was a bumpy 4 years sometimes. I learned a lot. And some of the people there were super nice. Some of the people I'm really glad I don't work with anymore. I guess it's that way anywhere. But that was what my skill was. He speaks authentically to gamers. We want somebody to speak about Activision authentically to gamers. Because when an executive opens their mouth, you don't trust them, right? But Major Nelson, man, he's out there and he was such a shining example of how to be professional but relatable. And through the Activision gig, I got to know him a little bit better, and he is a fantastic guy. Like, he is genuinely smart and authentic, and he's real, But he also knows how to be a spokesperson of something as big as the Xbox brand and still be friendly. Right. So that's the key skill that translates over, and why marketers now want that, because they feel like that. We can buy relatability,
Right. I always had a very I came up in the games writing scene in that very pretentious artsy art criticism era of it all, and I had a bit of a turbulent journalism career as a freelancer. Never really stepped into the editorial space, mostly because I was like, I'm just gonna write for myself and send it in, and you get what you get. I don't care enough about the reader. I don't care enough about the editor or whatever big machine is operating above me. So I've always been curious then, if you got, to keep these other entities in mind, which you've done well, how do you do that and not lose self in the process?
this becomes a personal discipline. My personal editing mantra is preserve the author's voice. Like, yes, you're writing for GamePro, but you are still Justin writing for GamePro, right? So it should still authentically be Justin. Whatever, what the byline is still yours, even if it's a cartoon character. The byline is still yours. So I don't want, and we've seen, I remember some really nasty stuff where like the staff didn't agree with a really low review.
Mm-hmm.
And so they changed it, and they didn't tell the author. So the author sees like they thought they gave it like a 3, and it comes out and it's like a 7 because somebody said, well, that's not what the game. Oh, okay. That's a communication issue between the editor and the author, and it's also a sign that the editor doesn't respect the author's voice. You're a widget. Please do this thing. I need you to deliver copy so that we can post copy. That's, to me, the wrong way to edit. Right? Like you have to edit with, well, why did we hire this person in the first place? Because we feel that they can express themselves. We had issues with writers there where like the staff strongly disagreed, either internally with a writer who was on staff and we would have fights about it, or we would have to work with a freelancer who had a wildly divergent opinion. One of my least favorite things is, well, everybody else gave it 5s. Why didn't you?
Right.
Okay. We are not all like, there's not some secret cabal with candles and a pentagram going, what shall we give the new Castlevania? Yeah, it's just not, it doesn't work that way. So yeah, I try to edit as lightly as possible, but I do at the end of the day have a responsibility to represent the voice of the publication. My natural voice happened to match the voice that GamePro wanted. So my writing samples were almost perfectly in line. Like I didn't get heavily edited while I was working at GamePro because my natural style was, hey everybody, we're gonna have fun. Here's what you need to know, and here's a pun. Jokey headline. And that was the GamePro style, and that's also my style. Now, of course, they used to be called puns, but now I understand the kids are calling them dad jokes.
Oh, right.
But I took incredible pride in making a headline and a subhead that were like jokey, like puns all the time. One of my favorites was there was a big change in the Gran Turismo series at Gran Turismo 3, I think, or 4, whatever it was, back in the 2000s. And the author had done a really good job of laying out like these are the significant changes, this is how it's all going to be different, and so we called it sequential shift, which is a car racing joke about how transmissions are made. Okay, some people are going to get that, some people are not, but if you understand like, oh, it's the third in the sequence and it's going to be a change, like those were the things that I would be like, earned my paycheck today. But when it comes to individual voices, you have to acknowledge subjectivity. Every review, there is no such thing as an objective review. Like, I hate it when people go, well, why don't you just say, like, well, then some people will like it? Because it's not the fucking role of a review.
Right.
A review is to say, this was my experience. You don't have to agree with it. That's the problem, is when people start thinking that they have to agree with that subjective thing. Now, in the case that you're talking about, if the writer, who is an independent contractor, has a subjective opinion that is out of scope from what is consistent with what the staff believes is a good game or whatever, that just has to be a conversation.
Right.
I can tell us
are going to have the like lasting ramifications of it. Right.
Absolutely, yeah. Then you're gonna like, not only is then the publication, which is larger than the writer, saying something they don't believe in that then they have to defend for the rest of their lives. And I can pull out a couple of examples of times when publishers were like, oh, so you gave that game a 10, but you gave ours a 9.5? So you're saying that that's better than... It's like, yeah, at the time it was. Like, that is, of course, 4 years ago at the birth of the console, and it is still one of the best experiences on there, but, blah, blah, blah. You get into that. And so it's even harder to defend those kind of things when it's like, well... I'm Justin. I'm just going to write what makes sense to me, and so be it. We never dictated this is your opinion, right? We expect, but we only hired writers that we trusted, understood what our larger goals were, understood what our publication voice was, and also understood their responsibility to speak on behalf of something that went out to 500,000 people every month. Right. So, yeah, it is a balancing act, but you can only balance with communication.
You spoke to a lot of the reasons why I was very heavy in the push for like doing away with review scores. That was a short-lived fad, but
No,
I think
every 3 or 4 years. Every three or
right,
4 years. Why do we even do this? I'm actually a really big fan of the thumbs up, thumbs down. A
right,
binary decision. 1 or 0. It's either worth your time or it's not. Because if it's worth your time, people will find a way to justify the money, right?
right,
Budget is a real thing when you're 14. When you're 21 and gaming is your primary hobby, you don't care so much about the money. It's if it's a game you want to play, then the second decision is, am I buying the $60 version or am I buying the version with a statue in it for 120 because whatever. So yeah, that's a reality.
right. Yeah, it's a tricky business. I have many opinions on how reviews ought to be formulated, but I don't think we need to dive into the particulars of that right now.
Flip this table.
So we've that's how you maintain voice when having to write for the machine and other
Right.
entities and all this. But you had a really great opportunity to write exclusively for yourself when you self-published your book.
Yes.
I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. I've got a million questions about how you got into GamePro and all that from the beginning, but I'm more interested in at what point did you decide, hey, I want to write a book, and what was the willingness to step into that uncharted territory?
I'll try to keep this a short answer.
Okay.
When I was at GamePro used to do a newsstand version and a subscription version. The newsstand version was the one that came in the poly bag, a little plastic bag that had stuff in it. It would have a disc sometimes, or it would have a booklet or a strategy guide or something like that. And one of those booklets that we did, GamePro was owned by the same company that owned the Dummies books. So for 2000, the PlayStation 2 was coming out. And I said, we should really do sort of like a PlayStation 2 for dummies. There's a lot of questions. DVD was an unknown format at that time. And this is going to be a lot of people's first DVD player. They also didn't understand backwards compatibility. There was a whole bunch of stuff. And I said, why don't we do an 8-pager of like a PlayStation 2 for dummies? And the publisher said, why don't we literally do PlayStation 2 for dummies? Like, we know those guys.
Right.
We'll just call them and ask them if we can use their assets. So we did a 2-parter. 2 booklets that sort of explained this is how the games are going to work. This is, your old controllers won't work. Yes, they will work, etc., whatever. And then that led to, let's do the actual PlayStation 2 for Dummies 300-page book, which was a nightmare because the publisher did not understand the fleeting nature of video games. So when I said, look, the meat and potatoes of this is showing... Do you remember the DVD menu from the PlayStation 2? It was 3 or 4 rows of inexplicable icons because it had to be localized, right? So you see it in English, or you see it in French, or you see it in Japanese. And the icons were not universal. They did not make sense to anybody. Top menu versus title menu? What does that mean? So I spent like a lot of time doing that. And I was like, this is going to be the manual that didn't come with the PlayStation 2. And the company said, well, what about all the... What about like using this to edit video? What about using this as a home web server? And I'm like, what? They're like, well, that's what they said at the press conference. And I said literally on the call, that's science fiction. And it just went cold. Like they no longer wanted to make this book, but they had contractually obligated to do the book. So I had to fill that book with more than 200 of the 320 pages with like a listing of the games that will play on the PlayStation 2. And I couldn't generate all that stuff myself, so I had to ask the GamePro staff to help me. I had to get license clearances for screenshots that they blew up the full page and did black and white. Everything looked like garbage. After that negative experience, I said, I want to write a real book.
Gotcha.
So that's where it starts. After that, I was very happy to be at all the magazines that I worked at. I was in charge of the letters column. So I would read the incoming mail. Sometimes I would reply personally, which would freak people out because they'd be like, your magazine's a piece of shit. How come there's like, it's more than half more than half ads. Why don't you get rid of the ads? Why am I paying for ads? And like, I would write back to those people and go, All right, let me tell you about the 65-35 rule. The idea is that it's 65% content, 35% ads. And those ads, ad pages pay the wages. That was the phrase in print magazines. The ads make it feasible for you to be able to get that $12 a year for 12-issue subscription. If we didn't have ads and we did 100 pages of just content, it would be $20 an issue, and I'm not exaggerating. Would you buy GamePro if it was $20 an issue? The answer was no. And other people have tried it, and the answer was also no.
Right.
So
I worked for one.
I read the number one question that I got at GamePro for years, for 7 years, was how do I get your job? Because, again, 12 to 14-year-olds, mom and dad are like, you're going to have to start thinking about a career. And the kid's like, what do I like? I like video games. Somebody gets paid to do that. I want to do that. So tell me how to get your job. And I realized that, like, most of those letters were either Hail Mary passes from some kid that thought, if I just tell them I'm interested, they'll hire me. And the rest were like, so how do I get free games? Because they thought that's what the job was, right? I've had to correct many people over the years the difference between game review and game testing. Because I hear game testing, I think of a QC or a QA environment. I'm like, oh, that's a rigorous process of reproducing bugs so developers can fix it. You're talking about review. That's a different thing. So I wanted to I knew that the next generation had to come from somewhere. And at the time, the press was very insular, right? The same 20 people saw each other at every event, And nobody wants to lose their job to a kid fresh out of college. So nobody talks about how to get that job. So I started to sketch out an outline when I left GamePro. I had so much of my identity and my license plate was tied up in GamePro. My license plate was actually GamePro. I was such a fanboy for my own job, so that when I left by choice for a different role, I had this major midlife crisis. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I was doing. I felt like my entire identity had been taken away. And so part of coping with that was specking out, why don't I answer that question to the next kid that is going to get my job? They should know what a managing editor is. They should know how much they're likely to make. They should know the etiquette of going to E3. They should not make all the mistakes that I have made or that I have seen other people make. So I started specking that out, and then I got hired by Games Radar and OXM. And so away it went, and I learned more. Because I was like, I don't want to write about this when I'm not doing the job, if I'm already doing the job. Mm-hmm. When I got to Activision, that's when I was like, I got to stop playing World of Warcraft. I got to write this damn book. It wound up to be about 300 pages, and it's intentionally sort of like a bathroom reader. It's short form essays of what you think the job is, what the job actually is. If you're serious about it, what you need to do skill-wise to get it. Then once you get it, how do you keep it and not screw up to the point where they fire your ass? And then, is it time to leave? Are you a crusty, grumpy old game reviewer who hates everything because you've been doing this too long and you're too used to your own privilege? Then this is what you can go do instead, which 9 times out of 10 is marketing. So that was, I wanted to answer that question of how do I get your job in the most elaborate, ridiculous way possible, which was whatever you're thinking and whatever stage you might be at, you need to know this is the roller coaster you're getting on. It's not just getting the job. It's doing the job. It's keeping the job. And then it might even be leaving the job. One of the phrases I used, because I have seen a lot of people that had this job who were grumpy and nasty, and they're worn down. There's deadlines all the time. They tell you take vacation. You never actually get to if you're on a monthly magazine schedule, right? When I left GamePro, I had banked the maximum amount of vacation days, and the financial guy was pissed because they had to pay me out money for that. And he's like, "Why didn't you take any vacation?" And I'm like, "When was I allowed to take well, we always tell you guys to take your vacation." You can't do it. You can't do it. We got a staff of 7 people making a national magazine. You're nuts. So, yeah, that was where the book came from, and it was partly to from ego to secure my own legacy. If I did something and I feel like it was important for a while, 15 years of doing it, I was like, what did it all add up to? It added up to at least I can help the next kid who wants to do it. Are you serious? Because I'm betting a lot of you are not serious. But if you are serious, this is the book you've been waiting for that answers for real. So that's where it came from.
Interesting. Yeah, it's I mean there's a lot to learn in that process, and a lot of mistakes I saw myself making. And you taught me quite a few things on the journey, even though it turned out journalism was not my destiny. But
What did you write for me?
oh,
Did you ever
I
write
don't know. I
anything for
don't think
me?
I don't know if I ever wrote
Or
for
you
you.
were adjacent. You were doing freelancing, but somehow we got to talking.
Yeah. Like I can't. I think by the time I was really like in stride, I think you might have already been moved on. Um,
Okay.
yeah,
Oh,
I don't know if I don't I got it. I've got stacks of OXM and stacks of PC Gamer and bits and pieces
I,
across the
I
web, but
yeah. I did
um,
one or two things for PC Gamer. I did a Diablo 3 cover story on PC Gamer like 3 years before the thing came out. I that was fluffing. Like they were like, we need an 8-page feature. I'm like, on a 20-minute presentation that I wasn't at in Paris. Okay, journalism. You know.
right. Um, the I think one of the interesting things here that about that whole story that intrigues me about you as a person is that you had this horrible experience writing the PlayStation 2 for Dummies book
I did.
and decided, hey, I'm going to thus then make a book rather than I think where myself or some other people might be like, okay, well, I'm never doing that again. You did the opposite and said, hey, I'm going to do it right. Um,
I immediately said I want to do it on my terms. Like I feel like I have a better book in me, and I want to get that book out.
right.
Like I didn't want PlayStation 2 to be my only legacy. Like I said, it was partly ego. It was partly like I need to validate everything that I've done for a decade and a half. But yeah, I really felt like there is a big story here that I am qualified to tell because I lived it, and I really feel like this advice could help somebody. And I felt compelled to do that. The best projects that the ones that I am most proud of, maybe they're not the best projects, but the ones I am the most proud of are the ones that like I couldn't get rid of them. I just like we came up with the idea and it just wouldn't go away,
Mm-hmm.
and I realized the only way out is through. So uh, I was immediately discouraged because I pitched it to a small publisher and they're like, no thanks. You know, so I wound up self-publishing, realizing that I'm looking for a hyper niche.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's a book about writing about video games for people that want to write about video games potentially professionally. It was not a memoir. It was not like here's the dirty secrets of the game industry. I'm like, man, there's like a 2 dozen teenagers out there that are going to be like, finally, So maybe I just sell 2 dozen copies and that's fine. So I didn't. I was afraid of being rejected more after the first rejection, but I still felt like, well, this needs to happen. And I knew from the PlayStation 2 for Dummies book that there was going to be interference, there was going to be editing. I was going to have to, again, speak on behalf of a larger whole. And when it came
Mm-hmm.
to me telling my advice on how to break into the industry, I didn't want that oversight.
Right.
I wanted to be able to tell personal stories along the way, getting into fights with Jeff Minter, things like that. I didn't want somebody to say, well, that's not interesting, because no, I actually know what I feel is interesting, and I'm gonna do that. So that was the way to do it. I lowered myself. It was never supposed to be about making a huge amount of money. First of all, I'm writing a book. Who
Right.
writes books for money, right? You write them for passion. Who makes money off of games, Justin? I mean, the same thing, right? Um, so yeah, that was. I did want to go right back into it because I felt like, okay, now I see the reality of doing it this way, but I really want to see what it's like to do it my way.
Right. There's a lot of what you said touches like keystones from my experience making my own game. The only way out is through, once you have this like concept for a game in my case. If it's really truly good or just sticky enough, you can't help but have to make it. And also like the self-publishing thing is a really because you released the book like Kindle singles were like kind of a fresh thing at the time, but you still had paper copies. There's a lot of stuff going on in terms of like self-publishing a book, and I'm curious like at what point, like how did you build yourself up to being the machine that can like manage all of that at release, because for games it's kind of a lot easier. Just you can push the button on Steam and there it is.
Right.
But yeah.
Well, I married well. My wife, I don't know how many people watching are GamePro, like remember GamePro, but my wife is Katrin Auk. She's now a photographer and a VR choreographer, which is pretty cool. But she was Miss Spell in the magazine. She had her own cartoon character. We actually have our own action figures of our two characters, which is something that I don't think a lot of married couples get to enjoy. But as such, I turned to her and I was like, look, you did graphic design in GamePro for 7 years. Can you lay out my book? And that was really the hard part. Can you design the cover? And so we talked about what I wanted, and she did some mock-ups for me. And then she had never formatted an ebook before, but she knew how to format like paper. So she laid out the book. Yeah, I think it was InDesign. It might have been Quark Express, but I think it's probably InDesign at this point. And we published it through CreateSpace, which Amazon later bought. But I knew that I wanted it in Kindle and in as many other digital formats. It's also out on iTunes and Nook, but like literally like less than 10 copies of Nook have ever sold lifetime, as far as I know.
It's the Linux of books.
Yeah, it really like you don't know about Nook. Yeah, so that was the hardest part. I didn't really know how to market it, and I didn't really know how to design it. So Kat was like, "I will help you design it," and she built the file per Amazon's Kindle requirements, and then we exported it, to other things. And for marketing, I just decided at the time, this was 2012, so I was working at Activision, and I had still some recognition as a writer from OXM and stuff like that. So I went to my boss at Activision, and I was a contractor there, so I was not a full-timer. And I said, look, I want to do this book. I don't want to do it at the expense of Activision. I don't want to make it look like I'm using Activision to sell my little book. But at the same time, like you hired me because you wanted somebody who had a little bit of a good reputation and a little bit of face to be your Major Nelson. And she was like, yeah, that's cool. She's like, mention it, talk about it. Don't change your channel to be all this all the time. She goes, but if you're going to go to PAX and you want to be on a panel and talk about your book, that's fine. Mm-hmm. So I was in a lucky position where I had a certain visibility that I felt like I could flip. And to date, I have sold a handful of books, like not a ton, like maybe 200 books lifetime, which to me honestly is great, because how many people want to know that shit? Mm-hmm. And also, like, I did it just as like, hi, I'm a print guy, as everybody's flocking to Kotaku, right? So, like, the book represents the same kind of processes that you would need to start your own blog or to work for a commercial blog. But at the same time, I was like, well, this was the last gasp for me to do it. I was also kind of stunned that nobody else had done it yet. Mm-hmm. And then, as it turned out, I wound up sort of co-promoting the book with Nathan Munier, who had also done a book more from the freelancer perspective. So I did it sort of like, well, here's the insides of a publication, and he did it from here's how to get inside a publication. So I really did the self-published thing for the freedom, and again, the fear of rejection. But the only way I was able to do it is because I happened to have friends who could help me with it. I hired two of my friends from GamePro to copy edit the book. When I was done, I sent them each a copy. They had each been either a copy editor at GamePro or a copy editor in a former life, and I worked with them at GamePro. And so I got really good feedback from that. And like I said, Kat did all the graphic design work. So I realized I had the benefit of being like a one-stop shop. Like, I knew the right people to help me get it out. And really, that's what you want a major book publisher for, is for layout, art decisions, and marketing. And I'm like, well, layout and art decisions live down the hall, and marketing is just me going, hey, everybody, I got a book, so, and that's that was my goal, just to get it out there. So, yeah, I've never published a game. I've never had an idea that I wanted to see through all the way to try to make a game. I did try game development, though. Here's one of the things about game review that I feel is really undervalued. if you review, I started out as a music reviewer, right? Like I started out at Guitar World and doing independent, like local papers and stuff like that. Um, if you review music, you probably play an instrument or you've tried to play an instrument. If you review film, you've probably made movies in your backyard on a camcorder or you've written a script or something. If you review games, you've probably played a lot of games. There is no requirement that you understand what people are going through to build that game before you go, that one sucked. And I thought that was fundamentally unfair. Like it's unique to games. You won't find film critics that were probably not filmmakers or film students at the very least. They have studied. We consider that, beating Zelda is a good enough, like, yeah, man, I'm an expert now. I'll tell you how to make games. That game, that's not Zelda. It doesn't get a 10. So that's I get upset talking about this. So I tried, for my own edification, I tried to build a game. And first of all, I failed using XNA on Xbox 360. Failed horribly and made an article about how terribly I failed. But before that, I tried to make a text adventure, right? Like I grew up playing Infocom games and parser, like line text edit games. So I got the Z language, which is now called, I think, Inform, is the publicly, like the open source version of the Infocom language. And so I said, all right, here's what I'm going to do. I'm building a room, not even a game. I'm going to build a room that's connected to another room. And in the first room, I have a button, a red button and a blue button and a yellow button. And I want those buttons to activate something in the other room, like a tank that opens up or water that drains from one place to another. So I've given myself very basic mechanics. And also I need to be able to walk into the door, into the second room through a door or a small hallway. And I'm going to make those doors lockable because obviously you don't want people messing with the yellow tank, right? So that shit took me like 4 days to just barely get it to work. Because and again, there's no graphics.
Yeah.
There's nothing. This is just like, I know words, and this thing is just logic, and you just had to build it in the engine. It was so gratifying when I got like the red button to work. I don't think I ever got the whole thing to work correctly. But I realized, like, okay, now I understand on a very small level what it is to build something out of nothing. And I think that's one of the core things that people can sit in judgment of games and look at a review, or just say, yeah, this shit sucks because some of the textures dropped out and the draw distance wasn't very good.
Right.
And I'm like, you have no idea what it took to get to that part. You shouldn't be like, it's one thing if you're just a grumpy consumer doing that, right? But you shouldn't be a professional reviewer if you haven't tried to do the thing that you're reviewing. You can't tell me that as a food critic, you're not also a home chef, And there's no such thing as a home game developer before they let you come out and say, here you go. Some people can do it. I think most people should try to make a game. The only successful thing I did in game development was I made some really cool skins for Quake 2. But even that, like modding like NASCAR racing, taking a 256 pixel palette and making a texture map that would lay over the car. I spent a lot of time doing that as a fan of those games. Well, we actually made GamePro characters for Quake 2 that you could use in multiplayer. So there was a Dan Electro, it looked terrible. There was a Scary Larry, it looked pretty good. All that stuff. I think we actually used one of the scantily clad female models, and I think I tried to make a misspell, and my wife's like, you don't have to do that. So yeah, I think that's a core flaw. Most people don't try to make a game before they decide what a good game is.
There's
I don't know if that answers your question at all. I don't even remember the goddamn question.
Either. There's
welcome to podcasting with me, Justin. Right. I'm sorry.
No, there's a question in the chat about how to get noticed by outlets if that's even relevant anymore. But
it is.
I think also, given the topic, I'm also curious, is there any value and how do we communicate the, like, process or hardship of making the game to a critic now? Is it worth anything to do that? And if so, how do we do that? Or do I just sound like another whiny bad lazy dev?
No, not at all. You're not a whiny bad lazy dev. A little whiny, but not lazy or bad. No, I don't know, because I currently work at a development studio that's owned by a AAA publisher, and I'm stunned at the level of work and the level of coordination that has to happen. I'm part of this process, and I'm like, oh my god, I can't fail. Like, not that it's impossible for me to fail, but I must take all the responsibility not to fail because there's so many other people in this process. Um, I I don't know. I mean, even when I was a reviewer, I had empathy for software developers. And again, I was kept at arm's length by PR. I would show up, at the developer studio. I would intentionally wear a GamePro t-shirt or an OXM t-shirt so that people who worked there would know that I was the enemy to a certain extent. Like, there's whiteboards everywhere. Sometimes I would come up and there would be curtains over the whiteboards, like temporary sheets. And I'm like, it's okay. If you Like, I was very flexible and understanding about that. If something slips and you need to tell me it's off the record, that's okay. I was unique. Other people didn't do that because I didn't want to burn a bridge. But I appreciated being let inside to see a little bit of the process. When I came over to do community stuff for Activision, I got to hang out at Treyarch, which was literally across the parking lot in Santa Monica. So I got there as they were building Black Ops 2. I guess it was Black Ops 2. I was there for 4 years, so I think I was there for Black Ops 1, and I got to see the development of Black Ops 2. Even seeing a team that size working together, everybody was insanely passionate. There's so much writing on the line, and I never really got the opportunity to tell that story while I was there. That was one of the things I wanted to do, and I said, think of me as your in-house magazine. Right? Like the story you would give to Kotaku, I'm going to pitch you on that. And there was one incredible story that when I learned what one of the processes was for David Vonderhaar, the multiplayer designer for Treyarch for COD, and I love Von. He's a really, really straightforward guy. I really enjoyed learning from him all the time. I was like, your process here is amazing. He's like, is it? Like, this is just what I do. And I'm like, no. I got to tell this part of the story. So I had to pitch my own PR team to say, let me tell this story. This is the only story I want. Like, I'm not going to ask for any other exclusive, but at the tip of the spear, I want to tell this story so that people understand the effort that went into this. Those were the stories I was trying to do as the in-house blogger. 2.5 months later, I read my story in a major outlet. They never gave me that story. And the PR person said, yeah, sorry, that was too good. So I don't know what the answer is. How do you tell people how much effort goes into it if you really don't understand until you're living in that? I don't believe there is a way. And I think part of it is because the skill set is so specific. You might be able to empathize, but until you go through some of those steps yourself, it's like a marathon, right? Like, you understand, okay, so you have to train yourself to run really long and with a lot of stamina. But you don't understand what it's like until you're at like mile X of mile XX, right? Like, when you start feeling it in your bones, then you're like, oh my God, okay. So I don't know. I mean, I don't really believe that it's the job of the reviewer to be empathetic to the developer. The job of the reviewer is to assess the end product. But I think understanding some of the process that goes into it probably makes you a better reviewer. Is there really a way to do that? Probably not. Right. I hate to say that because I don't like that answer. But thinking about the access that I have within a dev team now, and when I came to Ubisoft, one of my favorite things was they were having meetings about games, in development, and I said I didn't want to interrupt. They're like, how come you haven't been coming to the meeting? And I'm like, oh, I didn't want to bother you. They're like, no, please sit in. Like, all of this is good background for you to know. And I'm like, oh, thank you. Like, I really thought I was intruding on their design process. Mm-hmm. And this wound up being for a title that did not ship. It was an idea that was developed and then it didn't go as far as it needed to go to get a green light. And I was fascinated. First of all, wow, you guys put in months of work on this thing. You know, it happens. But like the first time I was in that meeting, somebody said, "Oh, and why are you here?" I'm like, "I'm just a fly in the wall. I'm listening. I'm the community developer. I just want to know, you know, how this goes." They're like, "Oh, cool." Like they welcomed that. But then I just stayed there and shut up and listened. There's no equivalent for the press to really get that kind of access. Even an embedded press member, like I know that some people have done like, "Oh, I spent a week at the developers, like the week that they were shipping this big title, and then the story comes out a couple months later. What was it like to ship this massive title in the last week?" Even that, even if you're friendly, you're only seeing some of the stuff. You didn't see the 18 months or 2 years before that, so it's kind of hard to put that last week into context. And if you're an alien in the environment, you're gonna be kept at arm's length. So yeah, it's a drag.
Then I've got the question of, is there any even interest from the reader or the public in getting these stories? Because like if we're gonna play the hypothetical mind game here, let's say you're my editor and I'm pitching you this really cool story of, I'm going to talk to Lucas Pope about how he made Obra Dinn, and we're going to go into exhaustive detail about like how this game was made and very little about whether or not it's good or interesting. Just talking about the process, like, would that even get a green light off of your desk?
Well, let's see. I'm your editor, and you say that, and I say, well, first of all, I didn't hear you say the words Dark Souls, so we're not going to run that
Right.
story. But yes, can you get the access? What kind of access are you going to get? What is the focus of the story? Is the story what it's like to be that developer? Is the story how some specific element of the game came to be? Like, I need more specifics before I can greenlight that. But it's not that there's no interest, because there's always going to be some people who are interested, but it's the people who want to do it themselves that are looking for that insight, not the average gamer that's going to go shit sucks when they see something that they don't like. They're still going to say shit sucks whether you tell them, "Man, we worked for 18 months and, I had to rebuild everything. We changed the rendering engine. That was a nightmare. I moved from Unity to something else." They're going to go, "Wow, it sounds like a lot of work. Shit sucks." you know? Like you can
It's too
lead a
true.
horse to yeah, you can lead a horse to water. I don't know if you're familiar with. You probably are. James Silva,
Yeah,
Scott
he was
Studios.
on like 2 3 weeks ago.
Okay, yeah, Salt and Sanctuary and the Dishwasher is how I met him,
Yeah.
because he won that first XNA contest, and I was covering the XNA event, and so he and I are still like friendly, and I love seeing him post on Facebook about some of the insane questions or requests or worse
Yeah.
expectations he gets from audience. Well, they literally assume there's a giant red button that you press that goes port to system of choice, like, and I'm just like, oh my god, so uh, gamer expectations are not aligned with developer realities. I firmly believe that. It's not that they couldn't be, it's that I don't believe that we currently have a really compelling way to show them, to help them understand the realities. Maybe the answer is we do an immersive VR game
Right.
of game developer simulation. Like not just the cool one on your phone from that I've
Right.
that I've
Right.
enjoyed playing Game Dev Story for all my life, but and then I just look up like what are the key ingredients. I want to only make hit games. When I realized I was cheating, I stopped playing. um, it's also a willingness for the audience to want to understand what it is to make a game. They would rather be entertained by a game, and would rather, it's way easier to just say, "I didn't like that game," than to go, "Why didn't that game work for me?" Or "Why did that game have flaws?" One of the secrets of reviewing games is it's very easy to write a bad game review. A game that comes in at like a 3 out of 10, shit, like everybody becomes Wolverine and you clean your claws. It's just amazing. You get up into like I did Gears of War for OXM, the first Gears of War, and I loved that game. I still love that game. I thought that was like super stylish and like visceral action and that whole bro action movie thing. It worked for me. I had a blast. I had the hardest time writing. Like, why am I justifying giving this our highest score?
Mhm.
You know, um, and then Fran Reyes, my editor on OXM,
My
bless
former
her.
editor too.
Yeah, fantastic. But she always said, and you know Fran, because Fran was super laid back, like one of the most laid back people I've ever met in my entire life. She's like, 6.8, kiss of death. Kiss of death was 6.8. On a 100 scale, it's neither good enough to praise nor bad enough to shred. 6.8. You really want to screw with somebody? You want to ruin a PR person's day? Tell them you're giving it 6.8. She would never do it intentionally, but like if you just feel like, you know. So, I don't remember what the question was. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know how to convince people, or if people necessarily want to be convinced.
Right.
It's easier to just vote with your wallet, and that's really all I expect the audience to do. Anybody that wants to know more, I like educating. I like saying, well, here's what I know. How does this help you? That's like throughout my career. That's what it is, you know. But I don't know that we necessarily can bridge that divide. The other question, real quick, somebody had asked about how to get on the radar for a publication.
This is what I was going to ask.
Real quick, I'm going to steal a line from David Vonderhaar from Treyarch. I had him on a panel at WonderCon one year, and he said he got a lot of hopeful designers, you know, saying like, this is the game that I want to make, and I can send you my spec. And he said, don't tell me what you want to make. Let me play it. Mm-hmm. Which his thing was, make a playable demo of whatever it is that you're doing. Even if it's crude, even if it's just using boxes, if you can prove to me that you can build a functional demo, doesn't have to be pretty at all, it just has to get your gameplay experience across, then I know you're serious about doing design. The same thing goes for writing. Even if you're just making your own blog post, even if you can write for a local publication, an Arts Weekly. I did a lot of music reviews for Arts Weekly. Then I went to a national publication, Guitar World, and said, I've been regionally published. My professor taught me that one. And that's what it was. I've been in local papers. Some of those were the school paper. Some of them were the local Arts Weekly in upstate New York, in Ithaca. And that was enough because it proved to them that I had gone through the process of writing, submitting, being edited, and understanding what it was to hit a word count, hit a deadline, and work with an editor. Doesn't really matter what else you do as a writer. That's what people want to hire. Can you write? Can you self-edit? Are you willing for me to edit you? Can you hit your deadline? And do you understand that you speak for somebody larger than yourself? As long as you can do those things, you're hireable as an editor or a writer. So the trick is, and again, I want to plug my book because my book covers many key strategies on how to contact the correct person at each publication. But generally, it's the managing editor or one of the senior editors. Don't go to the editor-in-chief. Go to one of the secondary editors, the executive editor sometimes. But generally, the senior or the managing editor is in charge of hiring new talent. And write to them and say, I'd like to find out if there's any freelance opportunities available. Here are 3 clips. Do not send them raw writing samples, or if you want, you can do 3 published clip and 1 raw writing sample because they need to see what they're really going to deal with, right? Because the published clips show them that you have worked with an editor, but they also know that that might not be your authentic voice. Like, what's the messy version that I'm going to inherit if I hire you? Don't send more than that. Just be polite and then follow up like a week later if you don't hear from them. Keep a record of who you've contacted and when. But yeah, that's the thing. You have to have written something, even if it's just a personal blog, before they will even consider hiring you. Because if they go, great, but can you write? One of my favorite stories was from Flux magazine. This was a snarky, we called it the Anti-Details. Because at the time, it was the early 90s, and there was like this fashion and culture magazine for young men called Details. It was like GQ Junior, right? And we were nerds. We were watching Beavis and Butthead and, reading X-Men in the Lobdell era, on the Rob Liefeld era and stuff. And we were like, I don't want to wear a blazer, you know? So we created this magazine called Flux. It actually said on it "no fashion" on the cover, and wow, I have completely forgotten in the middle of. So we got a letter once from a guy who said we did a story called "The 100 Greatest Video Games of All Time," right? So, F you, we invented clickbait before you could click, right? So we did a listicle, and we were a very small magazine, 3 editors. I was one of those editors, and I was only working there part-time because I worked for the same publisher. But I loved writing about video games, and so they were like, yeah, you can help us with this project. Here, write all the shit that we don't want to write. Okay, great. 100 greatest games of all time. Okay, we got a fact check. Dan, what year did this come out? That came out in 1984 in arcades. Are you sure? Yes. Okay, print it. This is before Wikipedia. Okay, so like this, I was there. He's a big arcade nerd. I got something wrong. One of the 100 things, 99 were correct. One of them, I misremembered the publisher of an arcade machine. And I think I said it was Cinematronics when it was actually Vector Beam or something like that. Like, we got this scathing letter. I can't believe how unprofessional you people are. Anybody who would get a detail like that wrong, that's just basic. You should be ashamed of yourselves. You should hire somebody that knows what they're talking about. You should hire me. Enclosed, please find my resume. The resume was absolutely one of the funniest things I've ever read in my entire life. The resume read as follows. Have played and mastered every game ever released for the Nintendo Entertainment System. Beat Final Fantasy III in 3.5 days. Beat Super Punch-Out in 4 hours. And my editor looked at me and he just starts cracking up and he goes, yeah, but can he write? He didn't send a writing sample. He didn't understand what the fucking job was. So, you know, he was like, the attitude is fine. We were all about attitude, you know? And I was the wet blanket, honestly. I was like, we can't print that. And then they would make me write that story. Like, all the time that happened. Anything that I went, oh, that's disgusting. Or, oh, that's rude. Great, that's your byline. And I would have to write it. They would just, like, you know, it was a hazing thing. So, yeah. Have writing samples is that's the long version of the answer. Contact the managing editor or the senior editor and provide them with writing samples that you're proud of, and then just keep going around until you find it and check back with them because staffing changes. You know, if they say no, write back in 3 months and say just wanted to check in and see if anything has changed. That's a polite way to do it.
Right. So translating that to indie devs like looking to get noticed. I mean, it's just let the work speak for itself in both cases, right? Like,
well, yes, but then plug the shit out of yourself. You know, like you've got to put yourself in front of people. You've got to risk that failure of no, thanks, we're not interested. But yes, the work, it is still going to be a meritocracy. If you can make good games, if you can write good articles, it's like the work has to be high quality or else no one will want to work with you. And quality is subjective, but, you know, be your own biggest critic.
Did you ever have a situation where a developer would send too much communication or ask too frequently for, like, if I'm shotgunning my demo to every outlet that I can and I'm reloading and shooting again every 2 weeks, is that too much? Is there such a thing?
Okay. Well, I mean, I don't know from a game development perspective, but I do know from a freelance writer perspective.
Right, but you're the freelance writer, and I'm sending you almost constantly. Please look at my game. Please, if this doesn't sell, I'm gonna die. Please.
Yeah, there's too much. I felt like a week after, if you didn't hear back, that was a reasonable amount of time because they might be on deadline. I was aware that I was writing monthly publications. Here's my biggest mistake. I wanted to be in Entertainment Weekly. When I was writing in New York, I was writing for Time Out New York. I was writing for Blender before it became what it is now. I was writing for Flux, and Slam Magazine was brand new. I was the basketball columnist for Slam, the games columnist for Basketball Magazine. And I decided I want to get in Wired, I want to get published in Wired, and I want to get published in Entertainment Weekly. Those were my goals. And I got published in Wired. And that was almost like a fluke. And I even made a mistake. The person that I wrote up for Wired was unhappy because I had missed a word that they said in our interview, and I fabricated a quote that I thought was correct instead of just calling them and asking them Can you please repeat what you said? I was too embarrassed. I should not have been too embarrassed because it was more embarrassing when they found out. So Entertainment Weekly, I was like, all right, man, I'm in Wired. And honestly, I had like other people when I would try to get other freelance gigs. Time Out New York was one of those where they were like, well, who have you written for? I'm like, I've written for Wired. I've written for PC, or Family PC magazine. And they're like, oh, if you've written for Wired, you're good enough for us. Like they literally didn't read my work.
Right.
That was like, open the door. You're in the most stylish tech publication of the 90s. Great. We want to be associated with you. And I'm like, you're crazy. Entertainment Weekly did not feel that way. So I would read and get frustrated with their game coverage. I felt it was lacking. I felt it came from I'm a movie critic, but I kind of like games perspective, right? Like they didn't respect the medium and they weren't telling the stories that needed to be told. And a lot of times they would get small details wrong or they wouldn't go into a lot of detail. So I was like, look, here's my clips. Here's what I want to do. Go. And I didn't hear back from them. So I waited 10 days and I wrote them. And I waited 10 days and I wrote them. And then I waited a week and I wrote them. I did that for 9 months, harassing them every week because after a while I realized I was not going to get hired. I wanted a goddamned answer. That was very arrogant, and I do not recommend doing it because when he finally got back to me, it was purely to get me to go away. Thank you. I have received your submission. We are not hiring freelancers at this time. Thank you for your interest. No, like, please follow up later. I'll contact you if I need you. Just go the fuck away.
Right.
So, yes, there is too much. I have never had my byline in Entertainment Weekly as a result. And I may never. Like, by now, I would hope 25 years later, there's different people. But maybe there's one old editor going, that guy? So, yes, there is being too earnest and too active because whoever you're talking to has their own rhythms in their own life. At my current job, every week, I might be doing something different. I might have time one week to talk to somebody. I might not have time another time. I would intentionally vary knowing that I was working with editors that were on a monthly schedule. Sometimes I hit them on the 1st of the month. Sometimes I hit them on the 10th of the month. Sometimes it would be the 20th of the month. One of those times is likely not to be a ship week. Like just space it out every 10 days. But then if you're getting don't do it every 10 days. If you've heard back from them once, then you have to leave a respectable amount of time, 2 months, 3 months. I don't know. I'm not sure what the rhythms are in the game industry for pitching indie games. For, if you're doing a monthly publication, then you've kind of got to let them do 2 issues before you call them back again. Because maybe their situation has changed to 2 issues, but it's probably not going to have changed the next week. Because if it had changed the next week after you stopped calling, they would have remembered you and called you.
Right.
It's just that simple.
Right. So as we come near to the end of our time here,
I'm happy to go for as long as you want, but
okay. Well, this might end up being a bit longer than expected. Over my career as my brief career as a game journalist, the most valuable and more, or I'll say at least the most remembered thing that you kind of taught me was the value of bridges. And I had a very good tendency to burn a lot of them.
Well, who doesn't, man? I mean, that's.
But this is something that you brought up briefly earlier about avoiding burning bridges, and it touched on this thing that I think about every now and then. It seems to be something that you've kind of held true to yourself throughout your career, the value of keeping those relationships and stuff. So I guess first I'd like to hear some sort of proof that this was that keeping the bridges is worth more than the thrill of the fire.
Well, I mean, I transitioned into game development because I had a positive reputation as a writer. I was known as somebody who wouldn't burn you, who was willing to work with you to build a good story. When I joined GamePro, it was very weird. I went into our first planning meeting. Right, the whole staff gets together. We talk about what stories are in motion, what stories need to be announced, what stories need to be assigned and stuff. And at that point, I had come from a small startup magazine that didn't really start up, and I had been freelancing and doing columns and gigs like that for about 3 years. But this was my first big thing. And I'm in the middle of this meeting, and I'm listening and everything. The publisher comes in. And he was a kind of guy, hey, buddy, like a used car salesman almost. And he said, you, I heard good things about you. And I was like, oh, thank you, and I didn't. And he closes the door, and like this tornado goes out, and all the editors look at me, and they're like, that never happens. He doesn't come into this meeting. He came in to see you. And I'm like, what? They're like, and when he says he heard good things about you, that means he called publishers. So like he called Sega, he called Nintendo, said, what do you know about this Dan Amrich guy? The entire industry does that. Everybody talks.
Mm-hmm.
You have a reputation whether it's earned or not, so you might as well earn it, right? So when it came time for me to want to even leave Activision, I was a contractor, my contract was coming up, I was ready for a change. I reached out to a friend from PR in Ubisoft, and he was working the Rocksmith booth at that E3. And I said, would you guys need somebody in community? Because I'm kind of coming to the end of my chapters here at Activision, and I'd really like to move on. And he said, yes, actually, yes, give me your card. That's what my reputation did, because I was known to be not a dick. And they suddenly started thinking, would we want to work with Dan Amrich? Yeah. That's the benefit of not sending the bridge into ash, right? Is like you never know what your reputation is unless you get some proof of it like that, And I felt very, very grateful that I had been polite to people. I had not taken advantage of situations. I had not been assumptive that I'm in the press, you have to kiss my ass, I was like, no, I'll be honest about what I need. This is the story I want to tell. Is this a story we can tell? Who can I speak to? I would like to speak to this person. It was a conversation. And so I just became known as a positive force in the game industry. And that followed me from GamePro. And I realized at GamePro, like, oh my God, I wasn't aware that I even had a reputation. I'm nobody, like I'm lucky to be here. I'm an associate editor. But I had been working professionally for 4 years. And people had an opinion about me. And when polled, they said nice things. So that's the only proof I can offer, is that you may be accidentally closing doors without realizing it, and you won't know until one of those doors opens. One of the creative director who was on at Studio SF when I joined was somebody that I had wound up doing demos with when he was working on another game. And it just so happened that was one of my favorite E3 demos that year. And I was wearing funny shoes, and we got to talking about my shoes. And that's just because I'm a hardcore nerd. I was wearing funny shoes. But years later, he's like, oh, yeah, Dad, do you remember the shoes? And I'm like, yeah, I do. Yeah, I still have them. And it was those little impressions that wound up making me memorable to people accidentally. But I was memorable as a good guy, not as a jerk. That's really all it was. I was never associated with burning somebody or taking something off the record or something like that. It was my natural inclination to not be a jerk and to be a little empathetic. One of the first things that I did when I started writing, I was getting free games, right? That's the dream. This is 1994. I got a free game from THQ. My head explodes, I don't know. I haven't been to CES. I don't know how common this is. When I started writing for an AOL outlet called Critics' Choice, there was no way for people to log into AOL to see my work. So, because you had to subscribe to AOL, it was a closed system. There were about 300,000 people on AOL at the time, if you can imagine that. That's how long ago it was. So I would print out on Critics' Choice letterhead my reviews that I was posting here, and then I would fax them to Sega, to Nintendo, to THQ, to Acclaim, so that they would see that they had not sent me a game in vain. I did not just take this and pocket it and give it to my nephew and play it and whatever. I was like, hey, thank you very much for sending me the review copy. Here is a copy of the review. I did that purely because I felt like that was a nice thing to do. Like if I had sent somebody a game, I would want to know that they got it and that they did something with it. So it just felt like the right, responsible thing to do. I did not know what the PR person who sent me that game had to do. Weekly reports. What coverage have you gotten us? Prove to us that you're doing your job. Okay, well, I got you a 1/3 page in GamePro. I got you a 1-page preview with a developer sidebar in EGM. Game Informer is lining up to do the first preview, and there's this kid Dan Amrich who did 300-word review on AOL. And at the time, I didn't know what a good job I was making them look good. And finally, after 2 years of this, my contact at Sega said, "Oh no, we love working with you. You make our jobs easy." I'm like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "Oh, I have a weekly report. You're always in it because you always cover all the games that we send you." I'm like, "Well, why wouldn't I?" She goes, "I don't know, but other people don't." So, yeah, it just came from a genuine desire to build a relationship, not to suck up to anybody, but it seemed like the decent thing to do. If somebody gives you a gift, you say thank you. Now, this was not a gift. This was a professional relationship. But I still wanted to say thank you, you know? So that was the kind of stuff that led me to, like, when GamePro was looking at candidates, they did this deep background check on me and said, "Is this guy a jerk or what?" "No, he's not a jerk. He's a sweetheart. Yeah, we love working with him." "Good, then I want you to love working with GamePro, so we're going to hire him." And then that just, plus and plus and plus and plus. So, yeah.
Have you ever burned a bridge?
I've made mistakes. I haven't made any. Well, the Jeff Minter story, which we will not get into now, I've certainly burned that bridge. And I have made mistakes where, like, I had a really good interview with an A-list game designer. And we just clicked on a personal level. So when I needed a follow-up question, I wrote to him directly. Oh, that burned PR real hard. They were not happy that I went directly to him. And I just thought, like, what's the problem? Like, we're buddies. Like, we were legitimate. Yeah. I still talk to this person. We are legitimately buddies. But that was a huge protocol breach. I got pulled aside. I got talked down by my editor. The PR person was like, "What the hell is your guy doing?" That kind of stuff. So I've made mistakes, but I understand what I did wrong. I didn't at the time, but I got their perspective and I apologized. I don't think I've ever permanently burned a bridge. Maybe there's people in the industry who would tell you otherwise. "Oh yeah, no way, I don't work with that guy anymore." And maybe it's something that I didn't know I did, or maybe it's something I've conveniently blocked out. Right. I still believe that largely I have a positive reputation in the industry because I was cognizant of not trying to make other people's lives hell.
There's a notion brought up in the chat that I prescribed to before you gave me the first stern warning about my behavior on the internet as a freelance journalist. Being
I don't remember any of this, man.
Oh, it was specifically the one that I remember the most was when Devil May Cry had that new edgy reboot, and the Capcom had sent me this box of unsolicited sent me this box of swag or whatever, and I like made fun of it online.
Oh yeah, I probably would have dressed you down for that.
Right? I sort of publicly, roasted them for trying to pull my obviously superior cred and that kind of thing. So that's when you gave me the first good lesson. I shortly left the industry or writing industry after that. But the notion in chat
on a rail.
Yeah, the notion
we could do an entire podcast just on the ethics of swag, but also the true purpose of swag.
Right.
The short version is they're not buying your opinion, they're buying your attention, and it's up to the individual writer to make sure that they understand that. This is to remind you that they want you to cover the game. This is not to curry favor unless you're weak. If you're weak, then they're going to pounce on that, but it's not,
Yeah.
Anyway, go on. I'm sorry.
Sorry. So the notion in chat, and I think what I had been trying to do at that point is the notion is burning bridges with others to build a bridge with them. Right. So here I am talking down about this DMC Devil May Cry with my attitude to build a better bridge with these gamers, my audience.
Oh, with the readers. So you were getting.
Right, and so
audience cred because you're not going to accept these toys from the man.
Right, and so I'm curious for your thoughts on this process.
Well, that does make sense because you don't work for Capcom, right? You
Right,
work
right.
for the
As
readers.
far as we
You
know.
represent the readers. Yeah, you don't work for Capcom yet. Maybe someday, man. Good
Right,
luck.
right. Yeah, no.
Um, but yeah, no, and I totally understand that. And that does make sense. Because you don't want to be compromised, nor do you want to look like you're compromised. How many times have we seen that review disagreed with my opinion, so therefore they must have been bought off?
Right.
If I had a nickel for every time somebody assumed I was bought off because my opinion didn't agree with theirs, I might actually be able to be bought off by the audience. Like,
Right.
it's insane. I drove a shitty car through my entire time at GamePro because these mythical payments did not exist. But the perception that you are compromised is the worst possible thing. The way that I put it in the book was, if you like your job, don't like these gifts more. It is okay to say thank you, but I feel uncomfortable with this, and return it. Many journalists that I worked with were just like, I gave it to a friend. I immediately handed it to my nephews. I donated it to like a local school for an auction prize, so that they could raise money. And some outlets just basically said, you're not allowed to accept anything, or you're not allowed to accept anything over $25, something like that. So like you can get a T-shirt.
I
Like,
sold,
yeah,
I sold most of my stuff on eBay to pay rent.
yeah. Well, I mean, well, that's the reality of a freelance writer, isn't it? Um, there was Interplay did a game that was based on the Seven Deadly Sins. I cannot remember the name of it. It may have been Of Light and Darkness. But I may be mixing up my two Interplay games. I'm sure somebody who's watching is like, how come this guy doesn't know what the Interplay game about Seven Deadly Sins is? Their PR campaign was to send journalists an object that represented each of the Seven Deadly Sins over the course of like 7 weeks. So Lust was a copy of Playboy. Now you're already over the line, right?
Right.
Greed was a $50 bill. Oh my God, you just sent cash money to the press to promote your game?
Right.
I get the cheek of it, but it obviously, like, if Playboy wasn't awkward enough, for Gluttony, they sent a hot dog cart and they bought us lunch and they set it up in our parking lot. These were all very funny, creative PR ideas, and that's how I always associated with it. That was clever. That was funny. Did it influence me? Only if I let it. Not supposed to let it, but $50 and you have a $25 limit on what you could yeah. Most of the outlets sent it right back or contacted them and said, I'm giving this to charity, and company didn't care because Interplay got a reaction.
Right.
So that's what all those things are for, is to get a reaction. But I do understand where it's like, well, for credibility, I need to reject these things. I mean, yeah, I have gotten some extravagant gifts, and my editors were always aware of it, and we would discuss it. And if it was like, hey man, that's too much, it goes back. Most of the time, my editors were cool about it because they're like, yeah, it's just kind of a fun thing, but we're going to write whatever the hell we want anyway, so I don't care. Excuse me. That's the attitude you have to have. I'm going to write whatever the hell I want anyway. One time at GamePro, and I will not say what company it was, we were negotiating a cover story. And this is the closest it ever came. The cover story was on a major game that everybody wanted. And we at GamePro, we worked on a beat system. So I was that company contact, right? I would work with specific companies. So they wouldn't have like 15 people calling them and saying, I need a copy of this game, or what's going on with this? You had a relationship. Smart way to do it. And I said, we want to put this on the cover. And they're like, okay, well, we'll let you put it on the cover if you've given an 8 out of 10, or 4 out of 5 on GamePro. And I'm like, I'm going to have to check that with my editor. And the editor's like, no, we're not guaranteeing. They're like, have you seen the game? I'm like, yeah, I saw the preview build. They're like, is it 8 worthy? I'm like, it probably is. Like, it probably will get at least an 8. It's very good. And they're like, okay, but that still can't be contingent on us getting the cover. We cannot promise them the cover for a score. So I went back to that company and I said, We cannot make that deal. I would still like to do this. I liked what I saw about the game, but I cannot guarantee you a score in advance. Because they'd say all the time, like, "Oh, you saw the preview build. What do you think?" I'm like, "It's really fun. I really liked that." I didn't mind offering a vague, non-graded opinion of saying like, "Yeah, that looked real good." A couple times they were like, "Hey, what'd you think of that game?" And I'm like, "You looking for honest feedback?" "Yeah, we are looking for honest feedback." Like quick focus group, right? I'm like, "This doesn't work. This doesn't work. The handling was terrible. I really hope that you guys have time to fix all that before it ships." "All right, good to know. Thanks." Fine. But we did get that cover story, and the game did ultimately get an 8, but not because we promised them an 8. It got an 8 on its own merits, but it's not going to stop them from asking. Now, modern day may be different. Again, this is like early 2000s, right? It is kind of the Wild West where you get a box full of DMC stuff, or like for a while I had an autographed Matt Hoffman bicycle for Matt Hoffman's games. When I left LA, I gave that to the PR person who gave it to me to begin with because they didn't have one themselves. And I thought, well, first of all, this was exorbitant. And it was wonderful that the publication let me keep it. But at the same time, I'm like, well, I don't feel right selling this. And I don't have anybody that I want to give it away to other than, so I just called the person back and I was like, "Hey, I'm moving. I don't want to bring this with me. This is really valuable and it's meant a lot to me." And like when I took it to the bike store to have them build it, they were like, "Is this legit? This is like, you didn't just write Matt Hoffman's name on a Hoffman bike, right?" And I'm like, "No." They're like, "Where'd you get it?" I'm like, "It was a gift." Because it was. But at the same time, they never believed me. They were like, "You're full of shit." And I'm like, "Okay, well, how much is it going to be to build my full of shit bike, please?" And I went and wrote it, So yeah, like there was wildly inappropriate gifts for a while in the industry, and then it became clear how wildly inappropriate it was. So you got like a box of tat, right? You probably got like a T-shirt and maybe like a water bottle or like a tote bag, something like that. What was it? Do you remember what was in it?
I think there was a shirt. There was a lot of that paper confetti stuff. Copy of the game. The PR manual. Please play our game this way.
Right. Like,
and I think a glass or something.
Sure. Like, but not like a ton of stuff, but just again, like $50 or less. Like
I was not that important on the on the screen.
No, that's like a standard. That was a standard. Here is the review copy.
Yeah.
Have a small gift with it. Like it was the top tier outlets got a different level of swag. It was very common to get a review copy and then maybe like a couple of tchotchkes, right? A T-shirt or a mug or a pint glass that's etched with or screen printed or something. My favorite was when I got the original Resident Evil for review. It came with a single combat boot. And it came with, inside the boot were instructions to go buy a cantaloupe, draw a face on it, and get ready to start stomping zombies. Practice now with this boot. And I thought that was really funny. And I was in New York, because this was 95, right? This was Resident Evil 1 on PlayStation. And my, or 96, I'm not sure. I'm so old, I forget now. And my editor at another publication where I was freelancing called me and said, "What the hell am I supposed to do with this?" He was not used to it. He came from the world of music, so he was not used to the weirdness that games would do. Music PR was less crazy, but games would do like, what if we send people like one boot, like, and I said, yeah, well, that's just, I had to explain Capcom PR. Yeah. And he said, well, what the hell am I going to do with this boot? And I said, well, I got one boot today too. He's like, really? Is it left or right? And I said, oh, mine's right. He goes, okay, mine's left. I'm like, wait, what size is the boot? Oh, it's like a size 9. Mine is a size 9. He goes, you're kidding. I'm like, no, and I'm actually a size 9. He goes, do you want the other boot? I'm like, yeah. To this day, those are the boots that I wear with my Ghostbusters outfit. I have Resident Evil, a free pair of Army surplus combat boots courtesy of Capcom PR in the mid 90s. These are my Resident Evil zombie stomping boots, and they are perfectly broken in at this point in my life. So yeah, weird crap that PR sends you is to buy your attention.
Mm-hmm.
I still gave Resident Evil a good review. I hope nobody feels that I was compromised because I kept the boots. The funny New York part of that story is he said, I'll send the boot over, and he sent it over by bicycle messenger so that I would have those boots that day. This was not a rush, dude. You could have put it in any box.
Right.
He's like, no, I'm just going to send it over. So, like, the front desk calls, and they're like, you have a delivery? It's a boot? I'm like, I'll be right there. It was like, he's literally just like, take this boot over to like 23rd Street. So go figure. Sorry.
No. Sorry. I like the story times. Chat kind of asking. So let's say I'm doing my indie game now, and I am sending keys out. Should I consider sending out a piece of swag to get a little bit of attention? And if so, how do I get people's addresses in this day and age, and without being creepy as hell?
First of all, the existence of swag immediately brings in ethical concerns. Okay. So it's actually something that I'm glad. I mean, I've got lots of great stories of the Wild West when ethics were like whatever, but I don't believe that it helps. The writer wants the game. The writer is on a deadline, or is hoping to secure a deadline if they're a freelancer or an influencer. They want to be first. They want to get it out there. They want to get their opinion known. That's their goal. They don't care about a t-shirt or a sticker. It is far more important that you give them a key and access to some sort of digital media kit if you can. Maybe that's just your website. Maybe you've got a secret section of your website that, an unlisted URL with a directory that they can just download high-risk screenshots if they need it. Most people will take their own, but depends on, what your game is. Certainly on Steam, I would expect everybody to take their own. Switch, it's very easy to take your own screenshots. But if you have guidance for them, who you are, what your company stands for, what your goal was in making this, you can offer that. They might not read it, but at least let them download it. So you don't need their address. You don't have any stain of impropriety. You're just sending them information and the product that you've sweat over. And honestly, that's all that matters. I don't think that swag helps. And if anything, I think in this day and age, with so much more scrutiny, after everything that's happened in the last 10 years, I think it's much more dangerous to send out swag. The big companies can still afford to do it. The big companies like tooting their own horn. I've got swag that I send out with everything that I sell on Reverb. I sell pedals and stuff like that. My wife and I have an Etsy store. Every time that I know that a friend has ordered something from that store, I send out stickers. I have stickers for my musical projects, for Hero Falls and for the Beatles Star Wars parody album that we did. That's all I do. And I don't send it to anybody unless I'm already sending them something else anyway. Mm-hmm. So there's no need. Don't do it. It's only going to get you in trouble, and it's only going to waste your development money. Don't do it. You're already giving them what they need if you give them a key.
But if I can't bribe them and I can't give them swag, then how do I get people to notice my game?
Write a compelling cover letter. When you send the key, think of it like a job application. Tell me something that I haven't read in a million other pitches. Don't even feel the need to be super polite and I humble myself before you. Say something funny. Get their attention. You're an indie developer. You have an indie perspective, and you've built something unique that's special to you. Let that come out in how you pitch it too. Even if it's a joke about, you have to be careful about joking what their job is. Like, I'm sure you're tired of Metroidvanias. People don't necessarily want to read that, but say something that makes them remember more than a pencil or a t-shirt or a mug. Say something that makes you sound more memorable, that represents you, your studio, your ethos about building games, or your title. Maybe it's just telling a personal story, just like Dear So-and-so. When I was 15 years old, that's instant. Okay, wait, what? You're telling me a story? I'm not expecting that in a cover email or whatever. The other thing is, make sure everything's spelled right, for fuck's sake. editors will instantly be like, nope, bottom of the pile. If you don't know how to spell their name, their publication, your game, I mean, there's been some bad spelling errors out there, and it sets a bad first impression. So yeah, all you need is your own personal winning charm and your enthusiasm and passion for making what you're making, and give them the means to experience it. And then let them know that you're available for follow-ups. If they want to do an interview about how the game came to be, you're happy to talk to them, do a podcast, do whatever, do a guest column. It's okay to pitch yourself, because sometimes, like OXM used to have an end column, and I was in charge of making sure the end column was filled. Sometimes it was Chris Morris, sometimes it was Jeff Keighley. A lot of times it was Jeff Keighley. He was the regular columnist for a while. Sometimes it was just people that I would find that I'm like, hey, a developer, would you write this thing? Or hey, you're an academic and you're talking about video games, would you write this thing? And then, ironically, when I left OXM, I became one of those end columnists, which was kind of fun. You can pitch yourself as an expert or an authority in the thing, and that might get you, just by offering that you can help them solve coverage problems, that might get you on their radar a little faster.
Right.
Why not?
Well, yeah, it's tough. I mean, there's a million questions about the modern ethical concerns, especially when it comes to influencers and stuff. But I think we'll. That's
real quick.
That's another.
When I was a reviewer, I represented GamePro. As an influencer, they represent themselves. As a reviewer, I was required to follow ethical journalistic standards. As an influencer, they're not.
Right.
Like, get paid is kind of like the mantra for a lot, and I understand it. It's just like an indie developer wants to build everything that they're doing, and be successful at doing it and be out there talking about, this is my game, this is who I am, this is what I'm doing. So do influencers say, hey, this is who I am, this is what I'm doing, and I need to get paid doing this, being myself and following my dream. You guys have that in common. It's just that they have a little bit more power when it comes to who is listening. And, they don't, if they want to follow ethics, they do. If they don't have to. If a journalist, game journalist, I really don't like the term, because I think about journalism as covering local politics and corruption and making sure that people's, the citizens are being represented. Whereas I was like, so let's talk about the breast physics in Dead or Alive volleyball. It's not the same. It's not journalism, is it? It's just game review. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I honestly felt very jealous of a lot of influencers after I left the press, because I saw that the influence had shifted. Like, the power went from, we need to curry favor with the press, to we need to curry favor with, just people working out of their bedrooms out of passion. And I'm a little jealous that I didn't have that idea myself. But I was even more jealous when I saw people like, oh yeah, I've got 300,000 subscribers. I'm like, that's as many people as read GamePro. Wow, like the world is different, and it passed me by. So yeah, I don't know how to get an influencer's attention, because honestly, that was past my prime, and I haven't needed to do it. So unfortunately, I have no insight on that. But I understand the frustration. But when I look at it, I'm thinking indie developers and influencers are kind of playing the same game from different sides of the table.
Right. Well, then, I mean, I think that's about it for questions I've got, and I don't see any more in chat. So as we're winding down here, is there anything? Oh, yes.
Somebody asked about the guitar an hour and a half ago.
Riggy did ask about the guitar.
Sorry. So, I am a guitar fan, and I'm terrible. You wouldn't know it to hear me play, but I am also a guitar collector because I have no children, and I was a singer in a cover band for several years, and that let me acquire a bunch of instruments. A couple of years ago, I took it upon myself to learn how to repair the guitars that I had bought, and then right before COVID, I started thinking I'd like to put together a guitar from parts. So I wanted to build a guitar. And I say build because, like, this came purple, right? I didn't do anything to it. I assembled the way that you would assemble a PC. I built a PC. I built a guitar. People who actually cut the wood say, you assembled a guitar. They are correct. So that's the Amrich. That particular style of Telecaster with Gretsch pickups in it is called a Cabronita, for little bastard. because it's a very rude, aggressive tone, and they didn't make them in purple, but I found a body that I could make one in purple, so I did that, and then of course I just had to make the Amricabronita. This was the other one that I built, which is the Amricaster for the same reason. So yeah, I had fun building those two, and the bad part is now I own 2 more guitars, and I'm running out of room
not that
to
bad.
put them. Yeah. So thank you. I appreciate any compliments on that because I'm very happy with how it came out. I did invest more money than I thought, but I think it plays like something that's like twice its price. So thanks.
Right on. Well, Dan, thank you so much for coming on the show. Is there anything? I mean, people can follow you on Twitter, but is there anywhere else you should point?
Yeah, if I can throw out a couple of plugs. I have free music, some about video games, some about just general nerd stuff at paletteswapninja.com. My friend Jude and I make stuff you may or may not have heard about our Beatles Star Wars parody called Princess Leia's Stolen Death Star Plans, which we did almost 5 years ago now, where we basically rewrote and re-recorded all of Sgt. Pepper over 5 years in 2 bedrooms and retold the story of A New Hope. That is our masterwork. That is okay. I am happy with that being on my tombstone. Mark Hamill liked it. You might like it too. Yeah, I'm on Twitter as @Dan Amrich. I'm on everything as @Dan Amrich. I never wanted to hide. After being Dan Electro, I'm like, no, I'm Dan Amrich everywhere. That's fine. So if you want to hear about guitars or nerdy crap, I'm on Twitter. And my wife and I run an Etsy shop called Katrin's Curiosities. So if you're into Star Wars cosplay accessories, like poker chips to play Sabacc, or an ID for your fictional character when you go to cons in costume as a bounty hunter or whatever, or you are looking for some unusual gifts for the gamers on your list, we make like personalized Yahtzee cards that are dry erase so that you can just use them over and over again, and you can put like grandma up at the top or whatever. That's yeah. Katrin's Curiosities on Etsy, or go to my Twitter, and I've been talking about it because it's gift season.
I dropped both links in the chat.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Dan, for coming on.
Plenty of plugs. Thanks for letting me ramble. I'm so sorry, but I love talking to you, and it's been so long.
Yeah,
and it's been so long in the works. You asked me to come on in June, and we've only been able to make it happen now in November. That's insane, but I appreciate your patience, and hopefully what I said helped somebody.
Well, I'm sure it has. All right, everybody. I'll see you later. We'll go. I'll send you all to. Looks like somebody's a new dev is working in RPG Maker, so we'll go say hi and see what we can do. Peace.